Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar, where we're going to be looking at how can Bristol change for the good following COVID-19. The speakers we have with us today is Niamh Hession of Turley, Pepper Barney of Bebo, and Sarah Jenkinson of Stride Treglown. And I will do a proper introduction to them very shortly. So just to introduce myself, my name's Jadine Havel and I'm a Senior Planner in Turley's Bristol office, and I also sit on the RTPI Regional Activities Committee. Before we get started, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Charlotte de Bourne, who is our RTPI Regional Coordinator for the Southwest, and also to Julie O'Rourke at WYG, who have organised this event today and handed it over to us to present to you. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping points for you all, just to make sure that we're all up to speed on things. Hopefully you've all come in and are muted. And if you have any questions, there should be the GoToWebinar panel either on the right-hand side of your screen or at the top of your screen. You can ask any questions in there for the speakers as we move on to the questions at a later date. The speaker presentations should be running for 45 minutes, so about 15 minutes each for our three speakers, and then we will move to the Q&A session. So pop your questions in whenever you think of them, and what we will do is try and get to as many questions as possible in the final 15 minutes. If anything isn't answered, we will be taking those away and we will email you with the answers to those questions following the presentations today. So rest assured, everything will be answered at some point. A copy of the presentations is going to be included, and it should also come up in your GoToWebinar panel. There's a handout session that will pop up, and then you can click on the PDFs and download those for future reference. If you lose connection at any point, just try and rejoin via the link that you had, check your Wi-Fi, things like that. And if we lose connection or there's any issues like that, we might have to relaunch the event. So just keep an eye on your emails. Fingers crossed that won't happen and it will be a smooth process. So we'll try our best. So I will introduce you to our brilliant speakers that we have today and the order that they'll be speaking, and then we will get cracking on that. So first of all, today we have Niamh Hession, who's a Director of Design in Turley's Bristol office. Niamh has worked at Turley for almost 4 years and is the design director that covers the south of the UK, and she's also helping to support the new design opportunities in the Republic of Ireland. She's responsible for new community projects and town and centres, city centre regeneration. She's a champion of placemaking and the enhancement of public realm, and keen to work collaboratively with the wide range of consultants to provide enhancement to future mitigation and management of site-specific characteristics. So Niamh will be presenting first, and then after Niamh we have Pepper Barney, who's an architect at Bebo. She studied master planning and regeneration at UWE and has worked in several practices across the city in the past. She's now based in Trowbridge, and is growing a business that's part of an emerging identity of participatory urbanist, operating and learning from within the trenches of a town that's aspiring to regenerate. And then last but not least, of course, we have Sarah Jenkinson, who's Senior Associate Urban Designer at Stride and has recently moved to Bristol after 10 years in London. She's an urban designer and architect and has master planned and managed several complex regeneration projects. She also specialises in design guidance. She was on the team who developed the National Design Guidance and the team that wrote the Bradford's Homes and Neighbouring Design Guide, and has also delivered some design guides at programme and project level as well. Sarah is a keen cyclist and she's been commuting by bike for over 10 years and travelled abroad by bike. So she has a lot of research and experience of cycle infrastructure abroad. So that should be interesting, and I'm sure we'll hear a little bit about that today. So that's a whistle-stop tour of our speakers. So I will hand over to Niamh in the first instance for our three presentations. And then once those have completed, we'll come to our Q&A. So thank you, Niamh. I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. So 2020 has been a pretty significant year. And it's been a significant year for me personally as well, because it's marked the point at which I've lived in the UK for longer than I ever lived in Ireland. And I moved over in 1998 from Ireland, and a lot of things have happened since then. 1998 was the year that New Labour came into power, and it also was the year that the Urban Task Force report was commissioned. And I've seen a lot of changes over the last 22 years. We've seen pedestrian and cycle routes running through the harbour side. We've seen Cabot Circus bring regional shoppers to Bristol city centre. We've seen more recently high density residential development breathing vibrancy into into once derelict areas. But probably one of the more stark examples of changes was Queen Square. When I arrived in 1998, I saw the effect of a dual carriageway that ran through this Regency square. But now it stands as a key part of Bristol's cultural and leisure infrastructure. So now I stand in 2020, the year of COVID-19, a unique experience, and I found that my experience and my life in Bristol was suddenly reduced significantly in size. During lockdown 1, my life consisted of the parks that I live next door to, the fruit and veg shop and the corner shop, and thankfully 2 bakeries. It opened up to my running route along the harbour side that I was allowed to do during my hour of physical activity. And once lockdown 1 was eased, this opened up some opportunities for me to directly access existing cycle routes for me and my family to enjoy. And subsequent to lockdown easing, I was able to access some shops. I was able to go to my place of work, access community uses. And when I mapped all of these uses out, it looked very familiar. It looked very much like the diagram set out by the Urban Task Force report in the report of as an example of a sustainable community. And there have been things that have happened over the last over the last year that have reinforced this idea of Bristol as a sustainable community, including the shutting down of Bristol Bridge and Baldwin Street to through traffic. They've opened up a significant number of segregated cycle routes from residential areas into the city centre. And I mean, and also it coincided with consultation on the clean traffic zone, which looks to reduce nitrate pollution within the centre. So what's the future? What can I see in the future for Bristol over the next 22 years? There are still the macro factors that designers and policymakers need to address. The need to reinvigorate the high street, which was an issue prior to COVID-19 and just exacerbated as a consequence of what has happened over the last few years. The housing need, the ageing population, and the climate emergency are all things that we need to tackle. And I think we can do this in parts, certainly, through continuing to enhance our city centres by providing more residential development. But if we do this, we need to keep in mind that structure, that diagram identified in the Urban Task Force report of what a sustainable and resilient community can look like. And I think there's still no harm in looking at existing examples of good, sustainable, resilient communities elsewhere. A really good example of this will always be Berlin. And a lot of those decisions are around reducing private car use within the city centre. They also take the opportunity to use every square foot, every square inch of spare space as attractive and active public realm. They take every opportunity to introduce planting. And every street corner is an amenity space. And the reduced car use in the city centre opens up access for pedestrians and cycles, which is enhanced by the increased population within the centre. So what do I see as Bristol as Bristol changing in the next 22 years? I don't know, but I do know that whatever the solutions are, whatever the outcomes will be, they will be the authentic and unique approaches that we've seen in Bristol over the last 22 years. So that's it for me. Thank you very much.
Oh, hi. Right. Hello. Okay, so I'm Pepper. I'm an architect and urban designer, but I'm a few other bits and pieces as well that I think impact my role in all of that. So how can Bristol change for good following COVID-19? To go in. Right. So making decisions with empathy. It's the year 2035, let's say, for example, 15 years. Future, we are not there now, so we only have to have a guess. Future Bristol, who lives here? Maybe these guys, okay. But who are they? We don't know, they're strangers. It's 2035, what do their lives look like? I mean, you should sort of pick a person. She looks like she might have had a rough start to the day or something like that. Does he cycle to work? Not sure. This person here is about to learn how to walk. Where are they doing that? What do we want for them? We want confident children. I think that goes without saying. Anybody would want that, wouldn't they? We want people to have supportive home lives. We want safe independence for young people, that kind of ability to test out what it means to be an adult, you know, when you're a teenager, but in a safe way. We want safe independence for older people who are living longer and want to live differently. Cycling, walking to work and school, we're hoping that that's pretty much normal in 2035. We want people to be comfortable, physically, you know, living in warm homes in the winter. That's particularly relevant at this time of year where the kind of fuel poverty thing comes up currently. Mental comfort, we want people to be happy. Financial, we want people to be feeling like they can afford to live where they live, secure in their jobs. We'd like people to maybe live in homes where they can make their mark, you know, put their stamp on things, personalize their space. And we'd like people to have fulfilling social lives. I think that there's probably more that we want for people, but this was just what sprang to mind for me. But now it's 2020. Where are these people right now? Well, some of them haven't been born yet, which I think is interesting to think about, sort of pregnant mothers or people who haven't even met their potential partners right now. Some people are stuck at home, unable to see old friends. That's really important. They're stuck at home, unable to make new friends, you know, dating, all of those other things, running into people in the street. A lot of people are still driving to work, or even worse, possibly working from home. Are they in cold houses? Are they worried about money? Are they worried about their health and getting sick? Are they in homes that support hobbies and personalization, which is something that we've come to value? But making decisions based on characters only takes us so far. And COVID-19 can teach us to pay better attention to the real people that are around us every day. And it gives us an opportunity to pay better attention to ourselves. So making decisions with sympathy. Lockdown made each of you live with yourself in an unprecedented way. What did you learn? I think for some people it's that sense of you've made a bed and now you must lay in it, depending on what kind of neighborhood or home you live in. What did you learn? I think if we keep on planning all development to be all things to all people, Why are we surprised at characterlessness and hegemony and placelessness? To support sympathetic built environments, built environment professionals need permission to say I more often. What would that change? When designing and assessing design, do I want to live here? And that's something that's been a big part of my personal career. How can I put my stamp on this house? How long would it take me to commute? Could I cycle? You know, you can walk around a master plan with your fingers and answer that question. Can my child walk safely to school if you lived in a certain house on a master plan? What shall I do on Friday night? We're not just professionals Monday to Friday. It's a 7-day week thing, and we need to think about ourselves as people, even on the weekends, and all that peripheral stuff that impacts on how we practice. Where would I do yoga? Put the piano, plant my phone. All of the other things that are nothing to do with your day job. Where do you do these things? I'm not suggesting that we do it all of the time. I'm just saying that if it's good enough for you, it's probably a good chance that it's good enough for other people. And why am I laboring the point about I? Because we already know how to make great places to live. The JFDI. I don't know how many people will have ever done any teaching, but I'm fortunate to teach at the undergraduate program at the University of Bath in second year. And what any tutor will know is that young designers really struggle to commit in all sorts of ways, but particularly with design, and they kind of have deadlines creeping up. And so these 4 letters appear on the studio wall within the first couple of weeks of term to basically remind the students to just fucking do it, because we already know how to make great places to live. 15-minute cities, it's what we're talking about now. Cycling, walking, having everything within reach. We know how to do that. Let's do that. We know about these things. We know about creating happy places. People want to walk around joyful urban environments. We understand about things like passive house and building things properly from day one so that they're inexpensive to heat. We like to think about things from 95 centimeters high and what it would be like to live in a place when you're 8 years old or 80 years old. We know how to do these things. Let's do those things. And they know how to do it abroad as well. This is a hotel. I've been fortunate enough to stay here and also speak with the architect. And he was pretty chilled out about it. He said, yeah, it looks cool, but really it was just a result of some planning constraint that said that we had to replace all of the footprint lost within the building to plant stuff. And he said, we could have put it on the roof, but we decided to do this with it instead. So there you go, architecture that arises from a policy constraint, and it's internationally recognized. So, JFDI. And if you're not in a position to propose and you're just making decisions, you do have this ability to just say no. And that's not NIMBYism. That's just sort of sticking to your guns. So the next thing we can do is mobilize the masses. There should have been some bolding in this, sorry. But this chap here has just contributed to the white paper, knows a bit about all of this. But he's looking for more diverse and competitive, I know he says in housing, but diverse and competitive industry in which small can thrive. He's looking for powerful links between identity and place, between community and purpose. So how can Bristol change for good? How do we ask Bristolians? You know, if we're somewhere here and trying to tackle this problem, we don't usually start asking people until somewhere in here. Quite often, a lot of marks have already been made on paper and decisions have been made, and they're difficult or expensive to change. So let's look at expanding the professional team of experts and consultants. Heritage, transport, economic impact. These are our experts in any locality. We also need to expand our definition and perception of community centers and community events. What's community? Oh, hey guys. You know, these are some community centers that we have at the moment. This is certainly my kind of vision of what a community center is, which I probably haven't set foot in since the last public consultation I went to. Is it a place to play? Is it a place to meet friends? A place to go on a date? A place to make money? A place to learn a new skill, maybe? A place to share ideas, sometimes. Or what about this place? Is it a place to play, a place to meet friends, a place to go on a date, a place to make money, a place to learn a new skill, or a place to share ideas? And this is definitely something that's coming up over and over and over, is what do we do with our high streets? And how have we hurt them in the past? And how can we help them now? So what's the worst that could happen? Empathy and designing for characters. You might be stereotyping and offend someone. Your good intentions might be misguided, time consuming, and clients really don't see the value. All right, so if you're afraid of stereotyping, go meet someone different. Base a character on them if you have to. Are your intentions misguided? At least you have intentions. I think mistakes are interesting and they add that character that we're looking for in placemaking. It's time consuming, clients don't see the value. Depends on what kind of service you want to provide. Sympathy, personal experience as a design tool or assessment tool. Is it unprofessional to talk about yourself all the time? You're unique and it's really irrelevant to other people, or it's biased. Unprofessional, I reckon that's probably a myth rooted in liability reduction. Unique and irrelevant to others, I think if social media teaches us anything, it's that we have absolutely no idea what's going to resonate with people. Put it out there, see what comes back. Fight your corner. If everyone else is fighting theirs, that's that kind of richness that we're looking for between human interaction that adds character to place. JFDI and strengthening your resolve. Client can't afford it, comes up a lot. Community doesn't want it. Or you've got unsupportive bosses or colleagues. If your client can't afford it, climate change doesn't care, and neither do the future generations. And isn't that really who we're here to talk about? The community doesn't want it. Why? Can you do more to educate and engage people? Maybe they're right. You've got unsupportive boss or colleague. Why are they unsupportive? Are you even in the right place? And mobilizing the community. Early and continuous engagement. People, normal people, they don't have enough facts to comment fully. They have insufficient expertise and undisclosed biases, irrelevant feedback from disgruntled people on soapboxes. They don't have enough facts. How can you give them more facts? And I'm pretty sure it takes more than an hour and 6 A-naught boards. If they've got insufficient expertise and undisclosed biases, this can add texture to potentially sterile space. And disgruntled people on soapboxes, sometimes maybe they're just saying what needs to be said. Oh, she looks quite disgruntled. Check out that soapbox. So what's the worst that could happen? You could make places where every body of water fails pollution tests. The safest, fastest, cheapest way to move around is in a private car. Kids can't go anywhere safely on their own. People are isolated because maybe you created a place on accident where pandemics rage across the globe. So how can Bristol change for good following COVID-19? I think Bristol can empathize with the daily lives of future strangers and make decisions based on what it wants for them. It knows some future strangers exist right now already. And Bristol can be proud to cite its own experiences, including the mistakes. And I think the toppling of Colston statue is one of the most remarkable events of modern history. Bristol can help retain character by celebrating humanity, the flawed bits, the biased bits. It's what makes it interesting. And Bristol can JFDI. It already knows what is good and bad urban design and placemaking. Bristol can support an empowered community voice early in decision making, and I'm not saying it won't be painful, but I think it's really worth that investment. It's worth making the effort. And Bristol can bravely ask, what's the worst that could happen if you're making an unorthodox choice? And I think from here, things can really only get better. Thank you.
I think that hands over to me. Hi, I'm Sarah Jenkinson, co-head of Master Planning and Urban Design at Stride Tregown. So we just take control. There we go. So when Julie and Charlotte asked us to think about how could there be a positive legacy that we might take from COVID in Bristol, I have to say I was at a point in the year where I was quite low on energy and struggling with what we've been having to deal with, because not only do we have the worldwide health crisis of COVID-19, but let's not forget all the other issues that are building up in our society today that I feel like have been really gathering pace over the last 5 years. Some of these are cause, some of them are effect. Whatever they are, they're here, and we need to work out how to deal with them. Add on top of that, quite a few urban design issues too. I'm an urban designer, I'm passionate about cities. I can't help but see what's going on. And all too often we see that there isn't enough space for our children to play that's high quality and safe and engaging, exciting. We have the increasing rise in inequality, which means, and I should say that the lower design standards for our houses that's happened over the last few decades, that means a lot of people don't have access to high quality outdoor space or great places that they should be able to get to in their communities. We have streets dominated by cars. Yes, part of that is due to the pandemic with anxiety about being in public transport, but that's just also the increasing car use that we see in our country today. Parked cars are clogging up our streets, and let's bear in mind that statistics show that cars are parked up 96.5% of their lifetime, so that's 3.5% of their life they're used, but they're being parked and used in our public spaces. And of course, we have the decline of the high street. Yes, in lockdown due to social distancing, but also with the rise of online shopping, people have less and less reason to access their high streets in the town centres and city centres. So then I got thinking, I was reading an article recently about the fact that in American cities, roads, pavements and parking make up 50 to 60% of central city centre land use. That's a lot of space of the in-between stuff, the stuff that maybe not everyone focuses so much attention on. We've just seen in the white paper the focus on talking about what our housing looks like, but doesn't really talk about what our public buildings look like. And are we even really thinking about what our public spaces look like? So how do we go from here? And wherever that might be, how do we make it happen? As I said, it's been a tough few weeks and months, all these issues building up, and I've maybe not felt so positive about what the answers might be. But I've been digging deep, I've been listening to podcasts, and I've been doing a lot of reading. I came across a fantastic TED Talk with Christiana Figueres, who is an executive secretary at the UN, and she was a key player of the 2015 Paris Agreement. And she hit a point in her career where she had a big decision to make. And she shared this fantastic quote with us, that we have a moral responsibility to choose the right attitude about the big issues we're facing in society today. Optimism is a moral choice. If we harness collective wisdom, we can figure it out. So let's think about what optimism can be if we think about things positively. Add into that another great quote I was reading. I don't know if anyone might have read the book From What Is to What If by John Hopkins. It's all about imagination and thinking about our cities and communities in a different way. Imagination is the ability to look at things as if they could be otherwise. And we do have the capability to effect dramatic change, but we're failing because we largely allowed our most critical tool to languish, human imagination. So today I'm going to choose to be optimistic, also because I've been asked to be optimistic about ideas for a revolution. But I'm also going to use a little imagination to do it. So next I got thinking, how have our cities that we see today come about, and how have they grown and evolved in the past? And in fact, it's true to say that the 21st century city is the child of a catastrophe. A major crisis has a way of exposing what is broken and giving a new generation of leaders a chance to build something better. We've also seen across many cities and countries throughout the world that revolutions really truly have come out of pandemics and disasters before. So even right here in the UK, there was the cholera epidemic in 1832. And this was a point where effectively the average life expectancy was reduced down to 26. More people were dying each year than had died in any military war that had happened in the empire's history. And so a whole shake-up took place whereby a health study was carried out and whole new acts were brought into place in the government that protected and started to look at public health. It had a dramatic effect on the way that streets were engineered and designed, but also on thinking about drainage, clean water and sewage disposal. And that's a pretty heavy infrastructure change when people realized things were getting pretty bad. Next, I've read about how New York has had several catastrophes that have led to significant change. There was a fire in 1835 that led to significant new water and drainage infrastructure and an enormous aqueduct that came into the city. In 1888, there was a huge snow blizzard which led to the construction of the subway so people could get around in winter. And in 1911, there was an enormous industrial fire which led to a significant change in working legislation and also the start of the 8-hour working day. And then let's bring things forward a bit. Let's come a bit closer to time. Let's look back at the 1970s in the Netherlands. The post-war boom meant that people were driving cars a lot more and there was far more demand for bigger infrastructure for motorways and fast-moving spaces for cars. But actually, this got to a point where there were about 3,300 deaths happening each year from motor accidents. 500 of those were children in an average year. So soon there were protests gathering all around the country to help stop child deaths around roads. At the same time, there was the oil shortage, which quadrupled the price of oil, and the government and several unions were set up, took this really seriously and took their role in safeguarding the city and its citizens and thinking about how could they be more sustainable and look after their citizens in the long run. And soon, cycle infrastructure, as we now know for the Dutch culture, is booming. So the other optimistic thing we have to know, and something I'm so proud of to have just moved to Bristol to be part of, is Bristol has such a hell of a lot going for it. It had the first chunk of the National Cycle Infrastructure Network that was built here between Bristol and Bath in the 1970s. It has its own urban design group in the council, which is quite rare for many local authorities. It was, of course, the 2015 Green Capital. It has already it's already known as its street art and street culture. We've had, looking back, a great history of things like the Clifton Suspension Bridge, which was a great infrastructure change, and of course all the reworking of the rivers to support trading back in the Industrial Revolution. And as Niamh referenced, of course, we've already seen how great change can happen in Queen Square. So what will Bristol's revolution be? Post-COVID, climate emergency, Brexit, recession, and the social media issues we have going on. So I have been looking back in lockdown and thinking what great things have been happening on a really personal level. In my street, in the friends' streets that I know of, what's been happening that's been a great move forward. And the thing I've most enjoyed is getting to know all of my neighbours on our street, meeting out regularly. We actually at one point had drinks every Friday evening at 6:30, social distancing rules there, of course, which led to barbecues and all the kids playing out on the street on a much more regular basis. I've got friends there as well who had fancy dress events and games that were happening in the street. And I think this is a great example of really realising how we can connect with the people right around us. So let's use imagination. The year is 2035, and I'm going to tell you a story all about what happened between 2021 and 2035 called the Bristol Street Revolution. So it's 2035, and since the start of the revolution in 2021, and inspired by the opportunities realised in the COVID lockdowns, Bristol citizens have reclaimed their streets. 50% of the city streets have either been converted to or newly designed as play streets, and 50% of all journeys in Bristol are now carried out by bicycle. Bristol has expanded its international reputation for its vibrant, dynamic streets and public spaces characterised by their infamous street art, award-winning cycle infrastructure, community stewardship, and unique integrated play facilities embedded into the public realm. And thanks to investment more recently in the early 1930s, late 1920s in pedestrian and cycle infrastructure, cycling and walking is fun, sociable, safe, and the favoured method for getting around the city. Tourism, cycle, and high street industries are booming. And how did it happen? Well, let me tell you. We all know, I think most of the people in this room will be planners and urban designers. We all know that trying to really make change, genuine change, big change in street design requires a lot of parts to come into place. And there's a lot of things to think about here. But I think if we focus on something really, really simple, and in this case, for me, it's cycling and play, we can actually make quite a big change by just bringing it back to basics. So in 2021, you'll soon hear that it was the inaugural Bristol Street Sunday. And Bristol in 2021, because everyone realised how much they loved their streets and they loved coming together and meeting out in them, they created a 50-kilometre network of closed streets for sport, leisure and play. It happened every Sunday from 7 AM to 1 PM. And the really interesting thing about this is that it's already happening. So in many cities in Latin America, they've been doing their street Sundays or ciclovías since the 1970s. This all started in Bogota in Colombia. And I'm so fortunate to have been able to witness and experience one of these mornings when I was traveling there a couple of years ago. I'm just the little bike that's just on the left there. But here they closed down their streets. They have 120 kilometers of network of streets. And this is for everyone. This isn't just for people in their light cricket and their fast road bikes, although there's probably a little section that's just appropriate for them. This is for children to come and learn to cycle on their tricycles, older people to get out and meet their families and friends, pop-up businesses that come and sell food, aerobics classes that meet in cross sections and take over a whole area of road space, and yoga classes that go and meet in the local parks. In Bogota alone, you can see the extent of the network that's now been built up. And this all came through from activists working in the 1970s and the government taking it on board as a fantastic way to bring equal access to great public open space for everyone in the city. And the benefits have been amazing. So they've obviously it provides a space for physical activity for every member, every citizen of that city once a week. And of course, it really encourages healthy habits. It reduces obesity and chronic diseases. And of course, the impact on gas emissions is amazing. But particularly the focus here is on alleviating social inequality and also the fact that the intervention is so low cost. It's so accessible and it's so easy to do. And they've already seen how the actual cost that they're putting in and the actual benefit that comes back per person has far exceeded their expectation. So what could Bristol Bike Sundays look like? Could we close some streets and put in some play features, set up our own yoga classes and really take over the streets to get active and meet our friends? Is it the 21st century version of the 20th century church services where everyone would get together and meet with their friends and family each week? So on top of this, following the excitement and all the enthusiasm that's been generating from the Bristol Bike Sundays, applications for the Bristol Council supported initiative Play Streets are soaring. We're in the mid-20s now. And for those of you who might not know what Play Streets are, again, this is something that's very much already in action. Play Streets were initiated back in 2009 right here in Bristol, and this is when two individuals decided that they wanted to help their kids play out on their street. And there wasn't really a way to make that happen at that point, but through lots of conversations and working with local people, they managed to develop a temporary play street order from the council. And we're at a place where there are already 45 streets that now regularly use their streets to close them down for a temporary period of time. It's usually about 3 hours for 1 day a week, which has stewards and supervision there to make sure that people can get out onto their street and make the most of it. So with all this realization of how we can think about our streets differently and think about it from low-cost interventions and using time in a different way, which is certainly something we've learned how to do in the lockdowns, this growing use of the streets has made Bristolians realize how much they value these public places. There is a widespread calling for more permanent consideration to the way we design streets for all people of all ages and not just focused particularly on private cars. The benefits are obvious. Bristolians are clearly the healthiest and happiest of the country, and real change is starting to happen in the council on a planning reform basis. The Cyclovia and play streets have brought back activity and social interaction into local neighbourhoods, high streets and the city centre, which were previously in quite a state of decline. And because of this, the whole way we're thinking about street design is completely changing. We genuinely are thinking about how cars and vehicles must yield to cyclists, which must yield to pedestrians. The hierarchy is starting to come back into the right order. And what might this look like? How does it start to become more permanent? Will soon cycle networks start building, the low traffic neighbourhoods start developing throughout the city, and play features that are really fun and engaging for our children are actually designed among our street centres and throughout our city centres. Maybe we even take it as far as the superblocks did in Barcelona, and we close down smaller residential streets that link up primary roads and literally dedicate them all for the use of how we want to use our public spaces. And soon the wider cycle and pedestrian infrastructure is beginning to expand more and more. Just like we see here on the left of Copenhagen's super cycle highways, what could be, how far could we really take our super highways in Bristol? Despite the hills, I think there's a lot of potential. And why is all this exciting? Because as I hope I've showed you, everything I've talked about has been done before. And I think what's particularly exciting is thinking about how we can really use low-cost initiatives, particularly at a time when we know that funding is not high on everyone's agenda or even possible. So we've seen examples from Netherlands, Denmark, Spain, many countries in Latin America, and I'm even aware that there's many interventions happening in the States as well. If the States, who are known as a car-dominant user, can do it, so can we. And the benefits will be immense. The Netherlands is already seeing the benefits from their street and cycling culture, which has developed since the 1970s. The number of deaths they prevent each year is huge. There's a greater life expectancy, and health benefits correspond to more than 3% of the Dutch gross GDP. 75% of children cycle to school because it's safe to do so, and it's the way that they meet their friends and interact with them on their own. And it's also represented very much in the way that their culture is driven: independence, self-control, modesty, and stability. It has a positive effect on tourism, and of course, such a huge impact on lowering fossil fuel consumption. So what do you think? Are you up for it? Can we make it happen? And the thing we have to remember is the way to make these things happen isn't just about waiting for councils to make change or for central government to change the way we need to think about it. It has to happen on an individual basis, a local basis, and we have a responsibility in our profession to take this forward too. So individually, we can connect with our neighbours and spend time on our streets and use our imagination. Locally, we need to campaign for more control and use of our streets and a bold intervention to kickstart change. And professionally, in our projects, we need to promote higher quality street design and really challenge the norm. And there's a lot on the cards for Bristol right now. There's some really massive sites coming forward for regeneration. So there's really is the potential for big change. We've got an election around the corner. What can we demand from our new mayor? And Bristol is well suited for bold and dynamic and creative change because we've seen it's happened in the past. We have the skill set to use our imagination, articulate it and illustrate it. And we've got to remember and share with our friends and families and colleagues that streets are our public places for our public use. I'll leave you with these two quotes. This is my final slide. This is again from the book, From What Is to What If. Imagination is resilient. If we can put to one side the factors that are suppressing it, it will re-emerge because it's our natural state. It's a fundamental part of being human. And of course, couldn't leave an urban design talk without a Jane Jacobs quote that cities have the capability of providing something for everyone only because and only when they are created by everyone. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. A huge thank you to Niamh and to Pepper and to Sarah for those really interesting presentations. It's really interesting to see, you know, with COVID and everything that's happened this year, that we're actually starting to think critically and constructively, but also positively, which I think is the main theme of today, about how we actually move forward, not just as professionals, but as human beings. And I think that's really interesting to see. Something that came out of all three presentations is actually how you as a person has been affected in the last 6 to 9 months, and actually what that means for you as a professional and the changes you'd like to see. I think we've touched on the fact, you know, it's not just COVID and isolation. We're dealing with so many other contesting issues in terms of the high street, ageing population, housing crisis, and it's really interesting to start thinking about how all these things come together and come to a head this year, really. I think, you know, it's really interesting to see about the tangible benefits that you've had. Sarah, you talked about that in the other countries we've seen, and actually this isn't just pie in the sky thinking, but we've seen how these things happen on the ground and actually how they might apply to Bristol as a city that's so known for being a city of change and for really tackling these issues. So that's brilliant to see. And I think from a professional perspective, we are at a point of change. We've got the planning white paper, we've got the spending review. There's a lot happening this year. And actually with COVID, we are thinking critically about that. And we do have such a huge opportunity for positive change. So huge thank you to you three for those brilliant presentations. And I think I feel inspired, and I'm sure some of the listeners do as well. So we'll move on to some questions, if that's okay. I've had one question come through, which is an interesting one, and I think we have touched on travel and sustainable transport through the presentations, and it asks, a lot of these webinars and articles talk about the need for the increase in active travel use, but how do we do this? The current active travel plans are under threat. How can people and businesses show their support? So just thinking about how we actually tangibly use those active travel plans and how can people and businesses show their support? Sarah, could I come to you first for that one? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. It's a fascinating question, and something that feels very on my mind, having moved recently from London to Bristol. In London, because no one can afford to drive or park, and to be quite honest, it would take hours to get anywhere if you wanted to. Everyone in every office gets there through public transport, walking or cycling. And I have found it quite fascinating. I've been in Bristol just over a year now, how such a great majority of people in offices travel by car. And there's great anxiety, possibly at senior level, to be quite strict about changing that and be quite bold about saying, we're just not going to operate that way. When I first moved to Bristol, I've always made it very clear I had to work somewhere that was in cycling distance to where I live. And that's always been essential for the way that I want to work. And I do think it takes a bit of confidence for companies to say, we're going to be located somewhere central and we're not offering parking. And people need to be more bold about that and not think that they're going to lose great staff because of that, especially now we've seen in lockdown, people can work remotely too. So I think that's a confidence thing. And it's already been done in London, so we can just copy that example.
Brilliant, thank you, Sarah. Niamh or Pepper, do you have anything to add to that? Shall we come to Niamh first?
I'm simply going to echo what Sarah's already said. I mean, I think it's our responsibility as business people to put our money where our mouth is, and for us as leaders to choose not to use private cars and to encourage those who work around us and those who we can affect, to encourage them and support any decisions around making those sustainable transport choices, and also to instill an idea of the healthy benefits of doing that type of thing for your mental and physical well-being. It has so many benefits and should benefit a company because their staff are healthy and well.
Thank you, Niamh. Pepper, anything more?
I guess I'm really curious about people's reasons for continuing to use a private car. And it's something that, you know, it's not really asked, or I'm not experienced it being asked, you know, why do you drive? And just kind of taking that pause to think about why you do, and drilling into understanding the reasons behind it could kind of shed some light on what the solutions are. And I'm just mindful that, you know, within these 4 virtual walls, we're probably largely speaking to the converted. But even in my case, I used to do this ridiculous thing where I would drive for 45 minutes just to park 45 minutes away from my office on Park Street so that I could walk for 45 minutes to get to the office. And, you know, that's just an insane thing to do. And it's yeah. So I feel like there's kind of broader discussion to be had there. And if your staff are coming from further afield, why aren't they taking trains? And I mean, trains in the Southwest, don't even get us started on that. So yeah, we're drilling into the reasons that are stopping us from doing it. Could be an interesting one.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd echo that final point, Pepper. I think there's still a lot of work to be done around the Southwest, which is probably the difference between ourselves and London in terms of those suburban areas and actually how we're getting people into the city centre who might not be living directly in there. So thank you. Those are some really interesting answers. I wanted to touch on one question that I had, just that I've been thinking about when looking and reflecting on these presentations. Obviously, the planning white paper itself, it focuses quite heavily on the ambitions that we've got for planning and urban design to sort of use more digital technology in the planning and design process and in engagement. And I just wanted to see what you thought in terms of how do you see digital tools and engagement actually assisting Bristol in the post-COVID world to achieve some of the opportunities that you've talked about today in your presentations. Niamh, could I come to you first with that one? Is that okay?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the information, sorry, to go back to an old school term, but the information superhighway, the investment in infrastructure of digital access for everybody is critical. It's critical to, and it should be replacing our investment in highways infrastructure. It has the potential to be a really positive equalizer, societal equalizer, by enabling everybody to have good immediate access to the World Wide Web. And it has been really vivid during lockdown, seeing how everybody's working from home. I mean, the type of work that me and my team do is very large. It involves working with very, very large files, and I think each and every one of us has had to upgrade at some point throughout the process. But it's there for many of us. But I think that my team and I are very lucky. We live in towns and cities that have access to that type of digital infrastructure. We need to broaden the spectrum of that absolutely fundamentally, because I just can't see any other future. We're past that threshold. We're past the watershed.
Thank you, Niamh. Pepper, are there any thoughts from you on this one?
I think the opportunities are to do, for me, you know, dealing with a range of ages. And one thing that technical kind of solutions don't really address is the older generations sometimes. And so I suppose we've got to be a little bit mindful that we're dealing with a spectrum here that might work for young people or people in middle age. But what I think is a real opportunity is certainly the kind of wayfinding side of things, and, you know, augmented reality is the biggest kind of area of attention at the moment, and wayfinding. And I think that that's what's really exciting, because I guess it sort of shares, it's a kind of a forum for knowledge sharing with whoever wants to look at it. You know, you don't have to go to your local civic society to find out the history of a place if you've got an app that's kind of telling you a little bit about it, if you're interested. And I think that that's what's so exciting about the technical sides of things, and not only the kind of practical how you get from A to B efficiently, but how you kind of engage a little bit more with where you're standing right now as well.
Thank you. No, that's definitely really interesting. Sarah, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, I totally agree with the points there made by Niamh and Pepper. I guess the points I'd add is we just have to be really careful. And I think one thing I hope we've learned in this lockdown is nothing replaces human contact. And we can't hide behind tech for really challenging conversations about the way our cities are going to be. We need to face up to it, and we need to be open for human, sometimes challenging conversations about how places need to be shaped. I think we need to make sure people feel empowered and that they will be listened to as well. And I think the other thing we just have to be wary of, and there are loads of questions and concerns that have probably come out of the white paper, while a system could be established and infrastructure could be in place to really support digital engagement, it's not just about what the tool is, but it's about how it's used. So it's about making sure we ask the right questions at the right time, feeding back what people have said. And that's something that we need to be good at now, and we're not good enough at now. So we need to make sure that we don't lose track of thinking about the process and that side too.
Brilliant, thank you. We've actually got a question that's come through, which is partially linked to this. And Pepper, you talked about, we've got so many different people to be trying to engage with through these digital tools, whether it's aging populations and young people. And one of the questions we've got is, how can the council involve young people in designing for streets and strategy? Are there any good examples from other cities on this? Pepper, could I come to you first on this one?
Yeah, I think the kind of first answer I have is I don't know, but this is something that we are spending quite a lot of time on right now with the Bristol organization, and just really looking at this, because one of the things I'm mindful of is that there's a lot of documentation out there available about engaging young people, and it's usually very long-winded, and there is no child in the whole world who would ever read 127 pages of how to be engaged. But I think it comes to Sarah's point about play and actually just getting out on the street and doing things and being visible, because kids in particular and young people, I mean, when was the last time your teenager fancied joining you to go to a public consultation? They didn't. And you apologize to your toddler, I have to go to this thing, and can you come and just be quiet, please, because I need to concentrate. And by doing that, we either kind of create these forums for discussion where they're really not welcome, or we are asking them to communicate their ideas under our terms. So there are good examples out there of engaging opportunities, where children have been engaged, but they're kind of novel, and that's the bit that we're trying to drill into. It's how you kind of get rid of the novelty of it and make it more normal to have these people just weighing in all the time. I hope that answers the question-ish.
No, I think that's really interesting to think about, actually, how we perceive these events, and the way we portray that to younger generations as well is fundamental in terms of making that something that they're encouraged. So sorry, Sarah, was that you next?
No, just to add in there, I mean, again, it's a choice that we make at the beginning of a project, and we have to use our imagination. Small plug, but I've just written a pocket guide to engagement that we're about to issue, and we've got to use our imagination. It comes back to the same point. We have to just think, how do we get children involved? And if we're making places, we have to get children involved. They've often got much better imagination than we have. Again, it's all about how a brief is set in a project, and I think we need to be careful to get that right from the start.
Thanks, Sarah. Niamh, any more?
Yeah, I think I agree with all of what's been said, but I'd also add that I think there's an opportunity, there's layers of access and education around children and their understanding of their public realm, their open spaces, and what they want and what they like. Sarah mentioned active streets in her presentation, and I would say that that's a really good grassroots way of explaining the benefits of closing streets down to traffic and what you can use that area of space when it's not fully not being used by through traffic. So there is again a leading by example for us, the grown-ups, to be able to say it's going to be within your control. You're the person who needs to shout up and say, I want this green space, I want this piece of public realm, and I think that that's really important.
Brilliant, thank you. We have still got 15 minutes of time. We do have the slot until 1:15, so I will just go through a couple more questions. I won't hold everybody all the way through, but I think there are some interesting ones that have come through. This one's got a bit of a sort of backlog in terms of setting the background to this question, so bear with me, I'll read through it. And I think it's a really interesting one in terms of how this works in practice. So the question that's come through is something that we get a lot in terms of feedback and during community consultation is the real conflict of opinion that there is when it comes to car parking. So many people will be keen for sustainability in design, but they're still opposed to proposals that are pedestrian-led and that they don't include enough car parking spaces, sorry. So it's difficult to kind of be forward thinking around this in terms of design and proposed development when there's still such a conflict in the community consultation and in the community opinions. Do we need the planning system to advocate change to encourage a shift in the opinion? Niamh, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure. There's so many things to this question. I mean, this is a really important question. I think COVID has implemented a paradigm shift in terms of how we understand how we live our lives. We know that we can work from home. We know that we can access public realm quite conveniently, and that we don't necessarily need to use cars so frequently. This is going to be exacerbated by the continued reduction of use of petrol and diesel cars going forward. I can't remember where I read it, but somebody has projected that the children of my son's age will never need to learn how to drive a car because they'll be accessing driverless cars. And these are things that are within our future. You know, there's big companies, Apple and various people are actually inventing these things as we sit here. So I think over the course of the next 20 years, we will see a fundamental shift in how we use private cars and whether they're actually something that's there at all. So I think we need to be, so there's a role for education there, but in terms of the practicality of communicating that to people who are concerned about how am I going to park my car every evening, I think we need to start implementing examples, an exemplar of how new communities can manage with fewer privately associated car parks. I think that, you know, you have really good examples in Germany and the Netherlands where you have communal parking areas and then you walk to your home. And that, I mean, it doesn't mean that you don't have a parking space, it just means you have to walk from one place to get to your home. And it's not that far from, you know, a reasonable understanding of how we use our cars and private use. So I think we need to lead by example again. I think that's my catchphrase for today.
Thanks, Niamh. That's great. Sarah, can I come to you next, please?
Yeah, for me, I think we have to attack this in two ways. I totally agree. We cannot expect people overnight to suddenly go, sure, I'm not interested in needing to park my car anymore because I've just switched my whole way of thinking about the way I live my life. We need to come at two angles. One is that we need events like Bike Sundays where people start to understand what happens when you start to use streets in different ways on a very temporary basis, where we're not changing things permanently, we're not changing planning policy permanently, we're just getting ideas of how it feels. But secondly, how can we expect people to stop needing their cars when we're not developing neighbourhoods and communities and centres that have high quality open space, facilities for communities, shopping, food? I mean, I've worked on estates where there are people in a lot of poverty that don't have access within a sort of 20-minute, half an hour walk to just fresh food, for example. So we have to take the parking bit out of the conversation for the moment and work out how we need to design places where people don't need them. And then we bring back in the parking question when people realize they actually don't need their car anymore, or they just need access to a car club because they just use their car once every 2 weeks. So we just have to come about it a different way, and we can't expect people to shift their mindset overnight.
Thank you, Sarah. And Pepper, please.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably just echo what Sarah and Niamh have said, but I think that, you know, from a policy perspective, it's first of all having the facilities available, you know, doing it properly strategically so that you can kind of start to design out the cars, because quite honestly, I don't think we're there yet. And at the moment, there's, you know, masses of urban fringe development that's going on that really does require a personal car, because there's not really a viable alternative in place for people, and I don't think it's fair to kind of take something away from them without giving them a sensible alternative. And I agree that, you know, doing a few trials to just show what it might look like, but also it's like rapid prototyping, isn't it? You know, this is what it might look like if there were no cars, and oh my God, like we need to sort out our trains and our buses and our cycle infrastructure. You know, it's that kind of thing, isn't it?
But and probably adding to that, the big issue we've got at the moment is, for example, the planning white paper. And I'm sure everyone in this room's got lots of thoughts on that, but it just focuses purely on housing and numbers. It's not about all the stuff that glues places together. And if we lose sight of that, then there's no way we can change that culture.
Thank you. That's some really insightful responses to that question, which is a very difficult and a challenging one. I will ask one final question, which hopefully brings this to kind of a positive close for you guys. Obviously, I think what's come out of this and this discussion today is we are being forced to deal with a lot of difficult issues that have been right under our nose for quite a long time. And actually, they're coming to the forefront. They've got these challenges, they've got these complexities, but in spite of all of that, it's hugely positive. There's an opportunity for us to change, to learn, to grow and improve, and reiterating the point that we've made throughout that Bristol is a city of change and it can thrive from this. So my final question to you all is, what is the most significant and the most exciting opportunity for professionals in Bristol, which has come out of COVID? So that's basically, what do you think for us as professionals in urban design and planning is the most exciting opportunity we've got that's come out of all the events of this year? So Pepper, can I come to you first on that one?
Sure, yeah, no, this is the one that really kind of excites me the most, because what I love with my own business is the flexible working and the ability for people to kind of meet in this kind of environment, remotely, working from home, you know, focusing more on the work that they put out rather than the hours that they do and the place that they do it in, which has had a huge impact on my career. And what that means is that we've got the opportunity, if we can sort of set up workflows like that, to listen to a more diverse group of speakers on the subject. Because once you get those heads around the table, you can really start to knowledge behind the actions that you take and start to address the needs of a broader kind of demographic group.
Brilliant. Thank you, Pepper. Sarah?
I feel like I've had the opportunity to actually play out all the sort of social components of placemaking that I feel like I've talked about for years, but never really been at home or on my street enough to do. And I feel like I've made that connection on my street, and I'd love to see, and I hope to see, that will build to something bigger and better. I suggested to my husband last night that why don't we make a car club for our street, and he laughed at me, so I've got some work to do.
It's a good idea.
Thanks, Sarah. And Niamh, just coming to you finally on that one.
All I would say is that I think that the biggest lesson for me out of lockdown is the value of the community resources that I've had. So I miss my work community and I'm looking forward to rejoining them. I took every opportunity to liaise with my neighbours in the back garden, and you know, bumping into people, meeting, having a commonality with people in the park. You know, there's all of these really important facilities that we have that we take for granted, that this year has really highlighted how important they are.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. There's some really interesting questions. Thank you to everybody who sent their questions through and for listening to today's presentation. Some really interesting, insightful and challenging topics I think that we've covered. So just to wrap up on this, the copies of the video, the presentations and any questions that we haven't answered today will be sent around to all the participants by email. There is a handout section that should have popped up in your go-to panel. So if you click on that there, you can download the presentation now rather than wait for that email to come through. Just keep an eye on the RTPI website. Hopefully you've enjoyed today's event, and there are a lot more virtual opportunities coming up, both in the Southwest in terms of national RTPI events. So we've got a few coming forward. We've got the Design Now, What Do You Need to Know session, which is on the 7th of December, a Modular Solutions to Housing session, which is focused on the Southwest on the 9th of December. And also another really interesting one, which might be of interest to people, is the Planning Dementia Friendly Communities, which is happening on the 11th of December. So have a look on the RTPI website for those. Thanks again to our speakers, and also what will happen for the delegates is there will be a feedback survey that will launch immediately when we close this event. So please do take the time to answer questions, give any feedback on this session, it will be much appreciated. Thank you all for your time and hope to see you soon.
Thanks.